It's gray and currently snowing, so I wanted to go for a little bit of a cozier atmosphere, especially in light of the conversation I want to have today, which is about what I personally like about the way the older generations wear clothing and the lessons that I personally take from it. Because it's not, I think, going to appeal to everybody, but for my personal style, there are very important things that I've learned from the older set. And older, I'm going to say 50 and above. There are pictures of people that I don't know precisely what age they are, because the thing that I actually want to start off with is my experience in Paris this year. I was in Paris a couple of months ago for my birthday, and my partner, who's really into street photography, was taking pictures. And I was thinking, oh, I would love to take some pictures too, because there's obviously such good fashion in Paris. And after I sort of started taking pictures, started really looking around, seeing what people are wearing, I realized that my favorite outfits by far were what the older generation was wearing. So I want to start off with some of the photos that I took in Paris. Yes, people in Paris are stylish. And I think there's just a broadness to the style. Like, so many more people are stylish in Paris than what I would say you see in New York City. But in some ways, it can be a little bit samey. The young people, at least, a lot of them are concerned partially with like what's in, and it looks good, but it's not super interesting. And I was finding myself somewhat much more interested in what older people were wearing. I think there's a couple of reasons for this. Young people are generally, all sort of responding to the same era of fashion that they're in. Whereas older people, I think often they will actually get settled in a certain era of their lives. So let's say they lived through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. They will pick up elements from each of those eras that worked for them. And then at that point in their lives, they've lived through so many different states of fashion. They've sort of created something a little bit new because it's taken pieces from all these different trends and then sort of settled into its own thing. That's my theory. I think it's kind of based off of my own personal experience so far living. I would say there's only like 2 decades I personally have lived through that I can really pull from. Another thing that I think older generations do sometimes is actually sometimes they just stayed in one era. So you'll be like, oh, they never left the 80s, they never left the 90s, they never left the 2000s or whatever. I hear people talking about that in terms of millennials a lot recently, like, oh, they're still in the 2012s, like she's still dressing like it's 2015. And I think because it's so recent, we think it's a little gauche, but I really like that. I like when people feel like they've found their era and their wardrobe reflects that moment in time and they want to keep doing that. God bless. I have no problem with it. So that was the thing that sort of set me on this path recently, but I want to go through some people I have found / follow online that I really like and the lessons I have learned from paying attention to the way they dress. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the look of clothes that have been lived in. You can sort of cheat, obviously, and buy clothes that are used, that are battered, that are worn, and there are a lot of vintage lovers and Americana lovers that do this for sure. But still, I feel like there's a little bit something different when you've put that work in yourself. And I know raw denim guys are really into that right now. You know, you buy a pair of raw denim, you wear them every day, and then 2 years later, they have like formed around your body and you can see, you know, where your wallet sits in your back pocket every day. And I do think there's something really beautiful to that. But there's nothing like someone who's been doing that for 20, 30, 40 years. So the first gentleman I want to talk about is Doug Bihlmaier. I found him originally on Pinterest, and then I was sort of like, who is this guy? He seemed very elusive, and he is. He's sort of hard to find. But his career has revolved around collecting as the head of vintage for Ralph Lauren. I don't think he does that anymore. I think he's a general consultant at this point in his career. And there's just not much you can find about him, but someone actually did an interview with him recently, like one of the first video / maybe only video interviews I've seen with him, which was great. I will link it below and I would highly recommend you watch it yourself. But he just has such an interesting perspective over also how vintage shopping has changed over the years, because I think when he started, it wasn't as popular as it is now, and he was finding such amazing things all over for relatively good prices. But I also think his personal style really reflects that. His clothes, it's really hard to say why he always looks so good, which is actually, I think part of the reason I wanted to sort of explore this theme, because I see him and I'm like, that guy looks great. And it's not flashy and it's not high glam. And there's just something so him. And he always looks like happy. A lot of times, if you see pictures of him, he has a big grin on his face. He has like a big bushy beard and a big grin. And I mean, this is what the kids are talking about these days, right? Aura. Maybe he just has aura. But also, he's a tastemaker, right? He's worked in fashion for a really long time. And there's something that I like the most about people who are really like working at a thing. They have this taste that comes through their outfits in a different way that's than someone who is an influencer or a model does, because it's just not so attention grabby. And that's personally how I like to dress. I want to look like someone who designs clothing, but not someone who wears clothing. The next person that I'm putting in this category is Jules, who is also just like a man about town. Like sometimes there's just figures and they're just icons. Like he's it girl to me, Jules. He is the author of Black Ivy, A Revolt in Style, which came out a couple of years ago. I think it's an amazing topic for a book because people really consider that preppy collegiate style to be something very rigid, something traditional and sort of institutional. But when you have people who were traditionally kept out of the institutions embracing the style, then it is a revolution. You know, it is transgressive. Funnily enough, he's actually British. He was born and raised in East London, and he worked for fashion PR very briefly. I read an interview with him and I thought he had something very interesting to say about it, which sort of relates back to the general thesis here. He said, "After a couple of months, I became a junior account executive, worked on some really nice projects, but what I realized is that I didn't like fashion. I liked magazines, I liked the creative process, but I didn't like fashion. It was the culture, it was the superficiality of the way people related, it was the hierarchy of the magazines, it was the disposability of the clothes." I really identify with this statement because I feel the same way. I love style. I love talking about the way people put together outfits and the creative processes and beautiful photo shoots and fashion shows that have wonderful narratives and set design and artistic vision. But the industry is tough. There really is a huge emphasis on disposability because that's where the money comes from and the churn of the trends. And that's a really tough environment to be in. This philosophy that he seems to have had from a very young age also speaks to his devotion to investing in clothing, wearing them for as long as he can, which is probably why his style looks so lovely and lived in. He is, like Doug, a huge vintage shopper. He loves to find unique pieces, and he also said at the time that when he first started shopping vintage, he felt more comfortable in those types of stores because he wasn't getting followed around or harassed by the shopkeepers as much. One thing I wanted to mention is that he's always wearing these huge, almost like Coke bottle glasses, right? And this is something that I've really tried to take to heart in terms of personal style lessons, is the reason he wears those glasses is because he has really bad eyesight. And I don't even know, he could be one of those people where contacts don't even work for him. And obviously laser eye surgery can be risky. So he has to wear these really big glasses, right? He said he's been nearsighted since he was a child. And it's just things like that you just have to do sometimes that can be your signature. Okay, moving on to the next lesson, and the two people I think who really embody it is comfort with style, or style with comfort. The first person I'd like to talk about is Hironobu, a Japanese man who unfortunately passed away this year, and so I send my condolences to his family. He, in his older age, took part in this project that one of his grandchildren put together because they were really trying to connect with him. His wife had passed away, and so they wanted to make sure that they were visiting him more. So they started this photo series where they took pictures of him and his outfits every day. And it just became this really beautiful Instagram account. And then it came to my attention, actually. Someone mentioned him to me, but he gained a little bit more prominence, I think, because the creative director of this brand I really like, Studio Nicholson, started sending him clothes and having him model for them, which is also a beautiful series. So really wonderful Instagram page. And the thing I liked is, I know this sort of like eclectic grandpa, or what is the other one? Like grandma who lives by the sea. That's not what it's called. Coastal grandma is in style right now. And, so this makes sense that this was part of the zeitgeist. But the things I really took away from it is he was committed to comfort. He never looked like he was wearing anything uncomfortable. And for my personal life, even though I'm young and spry to a certain degree, I like being comfortable every day. I don't like feeling like I'm wearing anything restrictive. I don't feel like I'm unable to do anything in my daily life because of what I'm wearing. Especially for me, I worked in production for a long time. So, I'm like carrying equipment back and forth. I was crawling under tables and plugging wires in and all sorts of things. Like, I wasn't going to wear anything that could get in the way of that. So I've never really lost that. And I just think he was a wonderful example of dressing for comfort and very stylishly. The other style icon that I also found originally on Pinterest is Lynn Wright. She is originally American, born and raised in Texas, but is the owner of a boutique in Paris, which sells cashmere, I assume, because it's called Crimson Cashmere. So she is someone, obviously, who technically works in the fashion industry, but I love the pictures she has on her Instagram. They're just wonderful. Very classic, very timeless. And, she's running a store. So I think she is the perfect example of someone who, like me, lives in a big city, has to walk or commute or bike everywhere she goes. She's a working woman, so she's on her feet, I'm sure, for long hours running around. But she's still a stylish woman. She wants to look good. She probably feels like she has to look good for her career, but she puts that all together and just has created something that's beautiful. I think her account also helps me because when I see what she wears, it helps me inform my own decisions because I would love to buy clothes that I'll still wear when I'm 60, 30 years from now. So to see what she's wearing and what works for her life and what still looks good and chic helps me decide what my closet should be like and evolve into. I also think a lot of her silhouettes are wide and relaxed, but they don't look trendy because obviously this sort of like oversized baggy trend is fashionable right now, but I don't think she looks like she's doing it in a weird way. And that's always something I'm worried about. Like, am I going to buy a bunch of barrel jeans and then they're going to look really dated? Or is there a way to do stuff that's a little bit baggier, a little bit more oversized that will look good for years and years? And Hironobu also wore pretty oversized silhouettes as well, right? Which I do chalk up to an interest in comfort. But also when I personally think about it, it helps me to look at clothes like that because I don't like to dress in a very body conscious way. I think generally, not all older people also don't like to dress super body consciously. Like, young people are a little bit more likely to like want to show off their legs or their arms or their stomach or their cleavage, whatever it is. And older people generally don't like to. So that's another reason why I really like looking at older people for style inspiration because that's personally how I already like to dress. The last lesson I want to talk about, and it's not something that I have really been able to institute in my life yet, is commitment. Going all in. The two people I want to mention are Lynn Yaeger and the Green Lady. Lynn Yaeger has worked in fashion for a really long time. She was a contributing fashion editor at Vogue. She was a writer. She was a fashion reporter for The Village Voice. And she's also been a regular contributor to The New York Times, Style Magazine, Travel and Leisure, and much more. I don't think I need to spell it out for you guys. The thing that I love about her is that she settled on a look and she delivers that look. She decided, this is what I like on myself and this is what I'm going to do. And I would actually love to know when she decided on it, if I can figure that out. She does say it evolved. It was originally a little bit more of a flapper look. She wore a lot of vintage clothes. And she says it's a way of working through her obsession with clothing and style without having to engage with trends. But I think what helps is she has a real sense of humor about fashion. She thinks it's like she knows it's serious, and it is serious, but you also don't have to take it seriously, if that makes sense. She's definitely a comme des garçons girl. I love that when you have such a specific aesthetic. Like, obviously, some brands are going to cater to you more than others. So she loves comme des garçons, which makes so much sense. This is something I would like to embrace more, but I find that my style is pretty changeable even from day to day. And I think that's mostly because I go back and forth between wanting to dress more masculine and wanting to dress more feminine. So it's hard for me to sort of settle on one thing. And even if I did wind up settling on one or the other, I think it would probably not be such a quote unquote extreme look. Even though she and I don't dress anything alike, I really do find her to be an inspiration because it's the spirit of the thing that is important to me. Lastly, I wanted to give a shout out to the Green Lady of Brooklyn. As it turns out, I didn't realize this, she actually did work in the fashion industry for a while. She used to have her own design company, which she ran for 15 years, and then she started running a small arts business, focusing on expanding and selling fabrics from her substantial vintage design collection. She's also a fine artist, and she's worked with big name manufacturers, Michael Kors, Liz Claiborne, Calvin Klein, American Eagle Outfitters, and Ralph Lauren, who apparently she still works with. I think the thing that really appeals to me about the Green Lady, her name is Elizabeth Rosenthal, by the way, and Lynn Yaeger, is that they have like really settled into themselves. Like they know who they are. And I don't think there's anything wrong with exploring your sense of style and your personality for your entire life. But there's also something very comforting about just being like, this is who I am and I'm going to be it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to embrace it every day. I also learn a lot from the older people in my life, including my mom, who is at least over the age of 50. And I hope to become one of those people myself one day. Let me know if there are any older style icons that you know and follow and love. I would love to find more.